Hello everyone, Dr. Shabazz here, and I would like to give overview for the exam Monday. I will talk about a few things. I will give an overview of the overview, the one that I posted some days ago, and I will also like to go through the questions from the quiz because you all don't know which answers you got right or wrong. Now, I typically don't make those answers available because what I don't like is that sometimes when I give you the answers, you will study the answers along with the questions. And it becomes kind of an exercise in memory and just remembering the pattern of answer versus the question. But what I like to do is to put things into context so that you could actually understand the answer and so that you won't have any probability of forgetting the concept. And so I like to go and explain these questions and answers so that it's clear and you're just not going by rote memory. But on Monday we will have our multiple choice exam, so make sure that you bring something to write with, a pencil, and that you come well rested. That's also very important. What I'd like to do now is just bring the overview. This was the overview that I posted on the 25th, some days ago, and hopefully you have begun going through it and looking at some of the terms that we will be seeing on the exam. Also, make sure that you've read the Cheeseless Cheetos article. I have mentioned that, and we have talked about this a bit in class. There's a lot in this article. It's about a 5-minute read, and they talk about various topics in terms of market entry, market research, market positioning, advertising. It's all in that very short article. Then also the McDonald's video that's at the end of this particular review video of chapter 1. You can watch it again if you want to refresh your memory. I have the PowerPoint slides. And then we get into the chapter 2 with the theories of trade, which is very important. We know what barter is. Mercantilism I cover on the review video, and then of course absolute and comparative advantage are also going to be very important, as well as the others. In trade, there are often these barriers to trade, tariffs and non-tariff barriers. Make sure that you're familiar with those. I also have the slides to chapter 2, and for chapter 3 will be the focus on regional economic integration. Now, typically, there are 5 stages, although the book mentions 4. The 5th stage would be a political union that would include a unification of the political apparatus. And so you have the free trade area, the customs union, which is the 2nd level, the common market, which includes freedom of movement of factor endowments and labor, such as if you're part of a grouping, there may be a passport, a special passport for admittance to a neighboring country without the use of your, without the need of a visa. So there are all of these different types of arrangements in the common market, and the economic union is dealing with the synthesization or the synthesizing of the economic policy. With the European Union, we saw they launched the euro. Other strategic blocks, the USMCA, formerly the NAFTA, the ASEAN, which is an Asian economic bloc, the Mercosur, which is Latin American, CARICOM, Caribbean Common Market, ECOWAS, which is West African. OPEC is an oil cartel. even though it's not considered a regional bloc, it is a bloc that is based around a resource, which in this case is petroleum. And this regional or this bloc of countries uh, consists of the oil producers. And they span the entire globe, and countries such as Nigeria and Venezuela. And I'm going to pull up a graphic so that you can see the countries that make up the OPEC. I just did a Google search, and this isn't large enough, but so you have Iraq, Libya, Algeria, Venezuela, Ecuador, Nigeria, Gabon, Angola, Iran, Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. Those are the OPEC nations, and as you can see, they are scattered around the globe. All right. And then finally, the life and debt video. We had a quiz, which contained some of the questions of life and debt. I also have the video down here with an introductory remarks, and I go through some of the economic policies. And that was done as a way to break down the some of the terminologies, because this is a video that you have to have some kind of prerequisite knowledge to understand the policies and the language and the structural adjustments and the barriers and all of the conditionalities. Otherwise, it makes things a lot less digestible as far as understanding what's going on. All right, so what I'll do now is I'll go through the questions from the quiz, do this, hopefully it won't take too long, but I had two versions of the quiz, and so I'll just go through the questions, and you will understand which version you had. I mean, it's the same questions, but I will have the question and then explain the answer. Okay, so the first one is about these organizations we've been talking about. The organization most directly involved in reducing tariffs was or is the WTO, which was formerly called the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. That organization is the trade referee. It ensures that all countries are playing fair in terms of trade, that there's not any type of discriminatory practices, which increases market friction. And so this idea of fair trade, free trade, and fair trade is one that the WTO is a proponent of. Now, I might add, since we saw life and debt, we saw that these free trade policies don't always work to the benefit of developing countries. The WTO was the organization that the U.S. went to complain about the banana market. Although they controlled 95%, they wanted access to the other 5%, and they wanted to have more or less restriction to the entry of the banana market in the European Union. And although the video does not say, the U.S. actually won that case, and the European Union was they were pressured to reduce the quotas and the tariffs against non-colonial or non-ACP countries, and they had to come up with a new schedule for countries to compete in. And so non-ACP countries were now able to compete with the ACP countries, which countries like Jamaica really felt the weight of that, and certainly put them at a disadvantage in the European market. But the WTO is the body that is the trade referee. Okay, so the next one, the theory of absolute advantage states that a nation can gain while producing those goods which they produce most efficiently. So coming from page 44, the theory of absolute advantage was pioneered by Adam Smith, who is famous for writing a book called The Wealth of Nations. And his belief was that free trade encourages countries to specialize in the production of those goods and services that they most efficiently produce. So if we look around the world, we'll notice that countries are situated in different geographic regions. So they have different climates, they have different land masses, they have different quality of soil, they have a differing amount of sunshine. Some are even blessed to have subterranean wealth. That means they have either precious metals or they have petroleum. They have reservoirs of petroleum underneath that they can tap. And over a period of time after the discovery, the exploration and discovery, they have been able to put their factor endowments toward harvesting these resources. Some countries which may have an abundance of sun may decide that they have a better opportunity to grow certain crops and commodities. And so you'll have some countries that are good at growing cotton, some are good at growing coffee, some bananas, and other types of products that need specific climate in order to grow efficiently. And so what happens is when you're looking for inputs to your finished goods, for example, if we take cocoa, most of the cocoa comes out of West Africa, and particularly two countries, Cote d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast and Ghana. They comprise of about 70 to 80% of the world market in cocoa. Don't quote me on that statistic, but I know it's a high number. There are cocoa producers in other parts of the world. Mexico was once a major cocoa producer, but their emphasis on cocoa has reduced over the years. There are other countries in Latin America that also produces cocoa. I think Brazil produces cocoa as well. Nigeria used to produce cocoa, was a major export before they discovered petroleum. But these nations that have a wealth of these resources to make end products, for example, chocolates, they would go to Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire because they're more efficient at producing cocoa than these other places, which has to produce them at maybe a higher cost, and maybe the climate does not allow them to produce in an abundant way. So this theory states that you would produce goods in which you're most efficient at producing, and it makes perfect sense. When referring to factor endowments, one will invariably be discussing land, labor, and capital. So in the book, it talks about the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, which essentially states that you have these factors of production: land, labor, capital. They also mention technology, which I put along with capital because it's a capital asset. If you're talking about computer technology, you're talking about infrastructure, that's also part of your capital investment. And if you're talking about intellectual capital or know-how, that also goes in the capital segment. So for simplicity, we say land, labor, and capital. And this also states that if you have a lot of land, good either quality of land or quantity of land, you should produce land-intensive products. If you have a high quantity or quality of labor, you should produce labor-intensive services or labor-intensive services. If you have capital, a lot of capital, you should produce capital-intensive goods, like we find in many industries that rely on these inputs to make certain outputs, like your computers, like your cell phones, like your tractors, and all the things that require machinery that can make and assemble these goods that we use every day, these automobiles, and you need all these inputs. But it's a very capital intensive industry. So this country, ironically, is service oriented. It was once reliant on agriculture, but and then manufacturing, and now it's a service oriented economy. So there are some paradoxes. There's something called the Leontief paradox, which is essentially what I'm talking about. That's not in the book, but there was a scholar who talked about that it is ironic that countries like America are still producing a lot of land-intensive products. Even though they're a capital-intensive country, they have a very powerful agricultural sector because of their capital investments through their machinery, through their technology, through their GMO, through their fertilizers, through all the things that make agricultural industry very productive and efficient. So those are some nuances that you might hear in other courses. Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 gave rise to which organizations? So that would be the IMF and the World Bank, which was created in 1944. I think it was 44 countries. 44 countries in 1944 came together and they agreed on the formation of these two organizations and also a currency system that would bring stability to the economic environment after the World War II was over. Bear in mind, this was before the end of World War II. So these leaders came to New Hampshire while Europe was still destroyed. And so they were planning for the inevitability that the war would end. So it ended a year later. The dropping of the bombs ended World War II. The U.S. has imposed an embargo with Cuba. This legal stipulation means there are no official trading ties. So this embargo has been long-standing for about 60 years, and the U.S. has imposed it because of political reasons. Now, it does not mean you cannot get American products in Cuba, because you can. And typically, Cuba gets these products through third parties. They get them through a third country, through Canada, through one of the Caribbean countries, and then they're able to sell those on the market because there is a demand for those products. It is the U.S. that has the embargo against Cuba, not the other way around. But if you go to Cuba, they will tax you if you exchange dollars for the CUCs, which is I think they're phasing that out. There's two currencies in Cuba. I think they're trying to combine the currencies into one. But they used to have a 20% tax on the exchange of U.S. dollars for Cuban currency. And that was as a punishment for the embargo. All right, let's move on. According to the text, which of the following is the second stage of regional integration? That would be the customs union, and that includes tariff-free area, also an external tariff policy. So tariff-free within, like you have with the USMCA, formerly the NAFTA, and then a uniform tariff, meaning if I apply this to NAFTA, now NAFTA is not a customs union, but let's say we use the United States, Canada, and Mexico as an example. they would have a uniform tariff policy, the same tariff policy, so that they can avoid one country going to one of the three countries with the lowest tariff rate and circumvent the other two. So instead of having that happen, they have the same external tariff policy, so that way that you don't have a destruction of that system, as we saw in East Africa, which happened to the East African community. So that would be the customs union with the external tariff and quota system. We go on to life and death. Michael Witter at the University of West Indies, or UWE, mentioned to his class that the IMF wanted to make the Jamaican dollar cheaper, in effect devaluing it. The idea behind this strategy is to attract foreign capital. And I have here the devalued Jamaican dollar would attract investors who can purchase more in Jamaica, relatively speaking, land, labor, and capital as inputs. So you can hire more people, you can rent more land or buy more land to build factories, you can buy more things in Jamaica, perhaps. You can borrow more if we're talking about capital. Getting access to Jamaican capital. Your American dollar would go further if the Jamaican dollar was devalued. Now again, there's some nuances there, because of course when you buy things, it also depends on the price levels that will determine how far your money can go. But that's kind of another, that's getting into chapter 4 when it talks about currencies, and we'll talk about that later. The main reason for dumping fresh milk was excess supply. You saw that you had milk powder that came in, and that served as an economic substitute for the fresh dairy. A lot of the dairy farmers were producing milk at a greater cost than the milk powder, which was coming in without any barriers. That was a condition for the loan. And that milk powder was subsidized, meaning that those who made the milk powder was able to do so because of subsidies. So they received subsidies from the government to make the finished product, because it has to be processed. So when they came in to Jamaica with milk powder, they priced it lower than the fresh milk, creating a glut in milk products. And the way it is, you have powdered milk, which has a longer shelf life. You can mix it, obviously, whenever you need it, and you can store it in your cabinet for a long period of time, and obviously it's concentrated. So you mix it by the tablespoon, and you stretch it out. And so it's a lot more convenient, and even to this day, a lot of Caribbean countries use powdered milk as kind of their staple for dairy products. So it would have been excess supply. So the onion farmer who talked about his situation, and he was talking about how the dairy industry had been crippled, and he even mentioned one of his own cases with he had a contract for cherry tomatoes and honeydew melons, and when he went to deliver, they told him that the sizes that he produced were not consistent with their sizes. So you have these requirements that can be based on size, it can be based on pesticides, it can be based on sanitation. There are a number of these regulations of quality requirements that are that these countries have to face. There's also a case in Ghana, I remember, that they were exporting bananas to the European Union. They're also one of the colonial producers. And the farmers were talking about how tough it was to export to the European Union because they had all of these standards, and that you had to have your bananas a certain size, and in order to do that, you have to have fertilizers, and you have to spray them with other types of chemicals in order to make sure they were ready for the European market. The banana farmers in Ghana stated that these fertilizers are prohibitive. They can't afford these types of chemicals, and thereby it's one of those things where they are not as they're just not as competitive because of these requirements that they have to meet. So that was a similar case here with the onion farmer. Quality requirements prevented him from successfully exporting those produce to the American market. And lastly, the banana industry was talking about the ACP countries, African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. They had a preferential access, tariff-free market, but the American companies, which controlled 95% of the banana market, wanted to compete in the other 5. They had access, and I should have worded this a bit differently, because they had access, but it was access with quotas and tariffs. It was a restriction. So the answer would have been the United States should have access to the European market, and they actually complained to the WTO, and that case was won by the U.S. under Bill Clinton, and the European Union had to renegotiate their tariff policy, their tariff and quota policy. That was really a devastating blow to the banana producers in the Caribbean and many other countries as well, which now had to compete against Chiquita, Dole, and Del Monte. So that was something that was being talked about a lot in the Caribbean in the mid-90s, mid to late 90s, and a lot of people were upset about it. And that was something we also saw in the video. So that will do it for this briefing. I went a bit longer than I wanted to go, and I hope this was helpful. And for Monday, make sure you get some rest. Make sure you've gone through these videos that I've spending my Saturday making these videos. So I'm hoping that you're making good use of them. And then Monday, make sure that you bring a pencil. I believe I'll have Scantrons for this exam. Some of our exams will be in different formats. I will have some Canvas exams, and I may have, and I have never done this before, I had students to bring their laptops in class to do a Canvas exam, but I know some professors do that. But I will have some Canvas exams that you'll take, and they will not all be Scantrons, but I do still think that there is room for old school and these methods, and having everybody there and making sure everybody is accounted for, if you know what I mean. You probably don't know what I mean, but certainly it's one of those things that still has its merits. Okay, so that'll be it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. I don't know if you're all going to be watching football, but you should take a break from studying and to relieve the pressure and come back. And I hope this video helps you, and look forward to seeing you Monday.